multiple substances. I'm very grateful to be here tonight, and I love what you prayed. And Revelation 12:11, I believe, says we overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And I'm so grateful that God has graciously given me a testimony to tell you guys tonight. So just to tell you a little bit about my backstory, I grew up here in Sarasota, Florida, in a Christian home. My parents taught school when I was younger. I'm an only child, so I was kind of entitled. But, never mind, we won't go on the pictures, but they're up there. Anyways, so my parents got divorced when I was 8 years old, and a lot of my story involves me searching for the love of a father figure or a man. So when I was about 13 years old, my mom brought somebody into the house that sexually abused me. So that was very difficult for me. And that abuse went on for a while. That person that abused me was the first person that ever gave me a cigarette, first person that ever gave me multiple different substances. And he treated me like a father figure, you know. He was active in my life, loving and all of those things, but he used that as a manipulation tactic to take advantage of me. So I started hanging out away from my house, right? I wanted to be anywhere but my house. And I was looking for a man in my life to love me. So I started hanging around this guy's house. And it was the party house. We were all allowed to do whatever we wanted there and stay up all night and party all day. So when I was 16 years old, that guy got me pregnant. And my parents were not going to let me have the baby. So they took me to an abortion clinic. I did not want to have the abortion. I remember very vividly going there and the other girls that had gone there, and they were just okay with what was going on. Like they had been there multiple times, you know? And I remember them taking me into one room and letting me hear the baby's heartbeat, telling me that I was 10 and a half weeks pregnant, and then taking me into the next room and taking the baby away from me. So that was very hard for me. And the guy that got me pregnant, the guy whose house I was hanging out at all the time, was the first person that I ever knew to overdose. And within that same year that I lost the baby, he overdosed. I wasn't with him the night that it happened. He called me at 2 o'clock in the morning. The next morning they found him passed away on the couch at 9 a.m. I held a lot of shame and guilt for that. I felt like if I was just there, maybe it wouldn't have happened. If I wouldn't have lost the baby, maybe it wouldn't have happened. So those things led to my addiction and really propelled my addiction, because I had already started using years prior to that. But with the traumas that I went through when I was younger, you know, when I started using, it was a way to numb all of that pain and to make me feel like I could be the person that I wanted to be around other people and fill that void. So after that guy passed away, I got into another relationship, and the next relationship that I got in, the guy was very abusive. And it didn't start out with physical abuse. It started out as him telling me that my clothes were too short and I was flirting with this person and I shouldn't have done this or I shouldn't have done that. He isolated me from my family. And then the physical abuse started. And he told me that if I ever left him, that I would never be with anybody else. And I knew exactly what he meant by that. He meant that if I left, he was going to kill me. I was with him for 5 years. And during that time, my addiction was progressing. So one day, he got caught at Walmart stealing, and he went to jail for 8 months. And I knew when he went to jail that this was my time, that I needed to get away from him. So I ran away to another state with who is now my husband. So we ran away to Georgia under the pretenses that we were going to stop using, because we were both already out of control at that point in time. You know, we both already had a drug addiction. So we were going to stop using, right? Well, when we got up there, instead of stopping using, we switched substances. Like I tried a lot of things in my younger years to manage my problem. I tried a geographical change. I tried changing substances. I tried only using this much or only doing it on the weekends. And no matter what I tried, I always wound up in the same place, powerlessness, rock bottom, one after another, because the drugs always had control of me. So my husband, who we weren't married at the time, right, but he got me pregnant. And I knew that I did not want to lose this baby because I had already lost a baby. And I knew that I had to get off the drugs if I was going to keep this baby. So we had been living in Georgia for about a year at that point in time, and I decided I was going to come down and visit my mom to get off of the drugs, and that's what I did. I came down, I detoxed, I was down here for a couple of weeks, and when I went back up there, I successfully had our first son, and then the next year we got married, and then the next year after that we had another baby. And life was really good for a little while. I was a stay-at-home mom. He worked really hard. Everything was what I had always hoped it to be, right? Because when you're young, you think you're going to get married and live happily ever after and everything's going to be great. But anybody who's married knows that that's a loaded statement. So anyways, and the problem with me at the time was, even though I had everything that I had always dreamed of and everything that I thought I wanted, there was still a very broken little girl inside of me, and no matter what, I was miserable on the inside, even with everything that I thought I wanted. So I came down, this about 6 years into it, I came down to visit my mom again, and I ran into my old drug of choice, my first love, right? Soon as I did it, I knew that that's where I wanted to be. I just wanted more of it all the time. I came back to my husband. I told him that I wanted to move back to Florida because I missed my family, not because I was using, because he wasn't using at the time. And that's what we did. So we came down here, and within a few months, it was like I was living a double life. I got a job at the paper route. At nighttime, I would go throw papers. So on the way to throw papers, I would pick up my drug of choice, and then I would go throw papers, and then I would pick up my drug of choice on the way home, and then I would come play Susie Homemaker for the rest of the day. Well, eventually I got caught because I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol. So my neighbor saw me using through the sliding glass window of my apartment, and she called Department of Children and Families on me. They showed up at my house, and something inside of me wanted to be clean. When they showed up at my house, I told them that I was using, and they said, okay, we're going to give you 45 days. We'll come back. If you can pass this drug test, then we will close the case plan, no problem. They came back in 45 days. It was on Christmas Eve, and I was ready for them. Not because I had quit using, but because I had fake pee shoved inside of me. So they came, I passed the test, and they closed the case plan. In my mind, I think that gave me and my addiction a right to keep using, right? 5 days later, I got caught in the middle of Clark Road fighting somebody. I had jumped out of a car covered in blood. The cops showed up. My kids were in the backseat of the car when it happened. So Department of Children and Families got called back into my life. At this point in time, I knew that I was not fit to take care of my children. And I knew that if I didn't do something, that they were going to be in foster care. So we sent the kids to live with my mom at that time. That was in 2014, and that is where they would continue to live for the next several years. So when that happened, part of me wanted to continue to use. The other part of me hated myself because I wasn't being a mom. And our addiction, both of our addictions, spiraled out of control. We wound up trying to run away again, geographical change. In 2015, we tried to run away because we thought it would just get better if we could just get away. But the problem with running away is that no matter where you go, there you are. So we ran away to South Carolina, and we had the house, we had the car, we had the jobs. On the outside, everything looked perfect, but on the inside, it was very dark. On the inside, it was very dark. We were using very heavily, and we were staying with his dad. And a few months into us being there, his dad suddenly and tragically died. It was very tragic, and that really just spiraled us out of control. I mean, if we were bad before, we were really bad after that happened. Our addiction kept progressing. It went from one substance to another substance, and it kept getting more dangerous. As we continued to use, the ways that we did it were more dangerous. The things that we did to get more were more dangerous. So About a year after his dad passed away, we were using very, very heavily. We had moved down to Florida to yet again run away from the police, and we were back here using very heavily, and my husband started getting high fevers, and he was going unconscious, and I didn't know what was going on with him, so we took him to the hospital and found out that he had a staph infection in his blood that had spread into his heart, into his lungs, and into his kidneys. He had kidney failure the night that we took him to the hospital, and they said, if you leave, you're gonna die. So he stayed at the hospital and went through his journey of going and coming and going and coming and going because he didn't want to stay and get the treatment done to save his life, because we were in active addiction, and if he stayed that meant he couldn't use. So we finally got him to stay there, and there were days that I did not know if he was going to be alive the next day when I came to the hospital. They didn't want me to be at the hospital because I was an addict in active addiction. I was covered in track marks, I was skinny. I mean, I'm sure I looked like God only knows, and they didn't want me there. So I remember those nights when he was in the hospital. I remember on my knees begging and praying and crying out to God, begging him to save my husband, because I didn't want my children to grow up without a father figure like I did. I believe now, when I look back on that those prayers are what not only saved his life, but what also saved my life. I prayed for a divine intervention and for his healing and deliverance, and that is actually what we both wound up getting. After he got out of the hospital, literally within a few days, he got arrested, and he accepted an offer from court to go to something called comprehensive treatment court that they have here in Sarasota. And I gotta tell you, I am so grateful for the Sarasota County judicial system. They have literally saved both of our lives. So when he accepted that offer, he kind of went over here, right? I mean, he went from jail to rehab to relapse to jail to rehab to relapse, but he was not in my life, And that is where I just went, there was nothing I was not willing to do to get the next one. I had lost my kids, I had lost my husband, I hated myself, I didn't have a place to stay, I had nothing. And I had so much shame and guilt inside that the only thing that I knew how to do was to numb those feelings. What that eventually led me to was living in a shed with some random drug dealer in the backyard of a trap house with no running water, no food, no toilet, no shower, no microwave, no refrigerator. It was a shed and a bed with a dirt floor, and this is where the insanity of my addiction had led me to believe that I wanted to be. So on July 19th, and it's really cool, today is July 18th, because I have to tell you guys, tomorrow is my birthday.
Woo, yep.
On July 19th, 2018, I got arrested, and the cop that arrested me had been after me for a minute. I'm talking about he had towed 2 of my cars, arrested my friends. He had pulled me over so many times that it's not even funny. If he saw me, he was going to pull me over. He had actually arrested my husband a couple times too. But anyways, so he arrested me that night. He finally got me. They caught me at a known drug house. They were waiting for me to pull out. As soon as I pulled out and hit the stop sign, they had me. So I went to jail on 4 felonies and a misdemeanor. A few days later, I got released on supervised release. The terms of my release were like, just don't use and call in, if they call your number or whatever, then you have to come take a drug test. So it was like 2 months, I want to say, before I violated supervised release, because even though I didn't want to go back to jail, I didn't know how to not use. That was the only life that I ever knew. So as soon as they released me, I was right back to using. And within about 2 months, I got arrested. My first arrest. So I got caught trying to falsify a drug test in the probation office. Bad idea. But I had put my mom's address on my probation paperwork, which is where my kids were located. So not only did I get arrested, but my probation officer also called the Department of Children and Families on me yet again. And I had already kind of slipped through their cracks a couple of times. So this time they were coming for me to take custody of my kids. So anyways, I went to jail, and I sat in jail for a few weeks. This time I got reinstated on, no, I got put on probation. Okay, I'm sorry, I missed one arrest in there. So I got arrested, got put on probation, and then the second time is when I got caught falsifying your drug test in the probation office. So anyways, so I got released after spending a few weeks in there, and I remember telling myself, like, I don't want to go back to jail. I'm just not going to use. I've detoxed long enough. You know, I can do this. So I had the desire to want to be clean, but I didn't have the ability or the tools to know how to stay clean. So I got out, I went right back to people, places, and things, which is where I wound up in that shed. So from 2018 until 2019, I was in and out of jail with the desire to get clean, but not the ability to stay clean. So July 1st, 2019, that is my clean date. On June 30th, 2019, I did what any good addict does. I used my drug of choice. I fell out on that dirt floor of that shed. I was down for at least 6 hours. I still don't know to this day how I survived that. The person that I was in the shed with, when I woke up, they were just sitting there like nothing had happened. They didn't care. They weren't gonna call the police or the ambulance on me, because we don't do that when we're in active addiction. I woke up and I did what any good addict does. I did another one. My mom had found out where I was staying at. She found out my location. She called Crime Stoppers and reported me. Got paid $280 to turn me in. So right after I did that next one is when the police showed up to pick me up. That was July 1st, 2019. I went to the jail, and this is really where the magic started happening for me. So I went to the jail, and I went through a horrible, horrible detox, and this is how God works in my life, right? I was on the way to the jail. All of my friends were going to jail for conspiracy to traffic, which basically what that means is that if you text somebody to make a drug deal, they can arrest you for it, and it's a very big felony, right? So all my friends were going to jail, so on the way to the jail, I'm deleting everything in my phone, right? Because I'm like, they're not gonna get me on this. Well, one of the messages that came through on my phone was from a girl named Amanda, and she had asked to meet up with me or whatever. I didn't know who she was, right? When I got to the jail, she was there. And we immediately became really good friends, right? We went from medical, the detox, which is like a part of the jail where you detox, into general population. We were bunkies in general population. Then she went to a place called the Recovery Pod. Now, I had been to the Recovery Pod one other time during my arrest in 2018 and 19, and they woke me up for a meeting at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, I do not want to be here. Like, you guys need to just take me back there where I can lay around and be lazy all day. So when she went to the Recovery Pod, I wanted to follow her, right? But I had to beg those people to let me get up there. And they did. They gave me a chance to go up there. And while I was there, you know, I had a couple of real God moments. I remember the ladies from Celebrate Recovery came in there, and the ladies from Bayside Church came in there. And I remember, you know, one of my biggest spiritual awakenings in there was that I realized that I had been rescued, not arrested. I remember hearing a Lauren Daigle song called Rescue. And when I heard that song, tears started falling down my face. And the lyrics to the song say, I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. I will send my army out to find you. In the middle of the hardest night, it's true. I will rescue you. And I knew that I had been rescued, not arrested. And that really gave me that little mustard seed of faith to know that I was right where I was supposed to be and that God had me there. And the ladies from Celebrate Recovery would come in and they would tell me that there's another way. And all that I had to do was surrender to God's will for my life. So I started praying while I was in there, and I remember feeling more free sitting in that jail than I had ever felt in my life. That freedom that I was feeling was freedom from active addiction. I went to a class while I was in there, and they handed me a picture just like this, as a matter of fact, and on one side of it they had a mirror drawn on it. On the other side was blank. And they said, on the back side of the paper, I want you to write who you portray yourself to be, who I want you to think that I am. And on the inside of the paper, on the mirror, I want you to write who you really are on the inside. I could write all day on the back of that paper who I wanted you to think I was, but I had no idea who I really was on the inside. That night, I went back to the pod, and the reading that night was about wearing masks. And I realized that my whole entire life, I had been wearing masks. So many masks that I completely lost who Sonia was. The next day, I went to another class, and the ladies in that class told me that I am who God says I am, and I can be who He created me to be. And that was like a revelation for me, right? What does God say about me? He says that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. He formed me before the foundations of the earth and had a plan for me. So anyways, I'm in a meeting one day, and I get a call from my public defender, and my public defender tells me that they're offering me 20 and a half months in prison. I had a court the next morning. The lady that was in the meeting that day asked me what happened when I got off the phone with my public defender, and I told her about it. So we were planning to take the offer because I was facing up to 20 years in prison. So we were planning to take the offer, and I remember the next day I went to court, and I don't know if any of you guys have been in jail. I know a lot of my people over here have, but but when you go through you go through a series of holding cells on the way to the jail, right? One holding cell to another, to another, to another. And I was in the very last holding cell, and all of the girls had gone out before me. And I remember the ladies that came in and just told me that if I surrendered to God's will. So I remember sitting in that holding cell and just praying and saying, you know what, God, if you want me to go to prison, which would also mean that I would lose the chance to fight for my kids. So it wasn't just going to prison, it was also losing my kids. But if that's what you want for me, because quite frankly, that's what I felt like I deserved, then fine, I'll take it. But if there's another way, if you have another plan for me, then I surrender to that right now. And I went into the courtroom, and that lady from the day before was in the courtroom. And she was on a board at a treatment center in my area, and she had got me accepted into the Salvation Army. So the judge had already seen me 3 times that year, and he told me, he said, if I see you back in my courtroom, you are going to prison for a long time. And I believed him. He said, this is your chance. And I knew this was my chance. So when I got to the Salvation Army, so when I got to the Salvation Army, and this is like a God thing, right? My husband had just been released from rehab, and he came to the Salvation Army, and he's like, listen, I don't care about any of that stuff that happened before. Like, I just want to have our family back together. And that's what I wanted to. I didn't ever think that was possible because of the things that we had done when we were in our addiction to each other. But that's what I wanted to. But we knew that if we were going to do that, that we had to work on ourselves, and then we could come back together. So that was the plan, and that's what we started to do. And I remember in the Salvation Army when I started working on myself and started doing step work, like I learned that all those things that I did when I was in active addiction, I thought that I did them because I was a bad mom. I thought I did them because I was a bad person. What I learned is that I did them because I was a sick person, because I was under the control of the drugs at the time. Because the person I am today, I promise you would never do any of that stuff that I did back then. So, and I also got to start working on my case plan with my kids while I was in there, and they had parenting classes, and I remember looking forward to those every single week, and the ladies praying with me, and I'm telling you, I got delivered in one of those classes. That treatment center was the very first thing in my life that I ever successfully completed. I didn't finish high school, couldn't hold a job, couldn't keep a driver's license. I mean, I was like the person in the family that if somebody asked or said, is Sonia gonna show up? Like, they knew I wasn't gonna show up. You know, like I was the failure, like I was the one that people really didn't want to admit that they were related to, you know? So that treatment center was the first thing that I ever completed in my life. And that was a really big deal to me. And they suggested to me that I go into a sober living house, which is where I went, and I got a job. And I've been gainfully employed since the day after I got out of treatment. I haven't been able to hold a job my whole life. So that's like a really big deal, you know, and that's what recovery does. Okay, so anyway, so my husband was also in sober living when I was in sober living, and we both started working on ourselves and working our own program of recovery, and we started saving money. And we eventually saved up enough money to get our first apartment. We got, well, our first apartment in recovery. We got a place on Valentine's Day in 2020. We moved back in together. And 2 months after that, April 8th, 2020, we brought our children home. We were officially reunified April 8th, 2020. 6 months later, we officially closed that case plan. It was 6 years that my children weren't in the house with me. And when I tell you, when they came home, they weren't really all that happy with me. You know, they hadn't been with me for a while. So it was definitely challenging, but I had to accept the consequences of my actions. Like, I did this, you know, and if they're not happy with me, that's okay. Like, I love them enough to be patient with them and to put one foot in front of the other and to show up and to be consistent and to show them that I'm gonna be the mom that they deserve. And through doing those things, one day at a time, one step at a time, sometimes one moment at a time, and through lots of help with my support network, you know, we have a great relationship today, we really do. I successfully completed probation March 9th, 2021. Now this is after violating probation twice and violating supervised release once. I remember when they were getting ready to put me on this probation, I remember saying to myself, like, this is a setup, you know, but turns out, like, if you're not using and you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, it's really not that big of a deal to get through probation. And now when I look back on that, like, I am so grateful that I did have that probation, because it really taught me accountability and it taught me how to show up, and all the things that happened in my life happened exactly the way that they're supposed to. And when I look back on them all now, like, I can see that. And I just want to add in one more thing and I'm finished. So when my husband was in the hospital, when he got released, they told him that he had 5 years to live because he was diagnosed with heart failure. Through the healing power of Jesus Christ, he has been completely healed of everything that was happening inside of his body. His kidneys, his heart, his lungs, everything has been completely healed. This year, just a few months ago, we bought our first home. When we were in our addiction, my kids used to pray for their forever home every night with my mom, who took care of my kids. And we finally got them their forever home this year. Recovery has truly given me a life that I didn't think I deserved, a life beyond my wildest dreams. And I'm so grateful that I get to share my testimony with you guys tonight. Thank you so much for letting me share.